In the third video on the Ruby programming language, I'm going to cover expressions and control structures. Ruby has some very interesting control structures. Let's take a look at them. The Ruby syntax is expression-oriented, and what this means is that everything in Ruby is treated as an expression, and therefore everything evaluates to something. So control structures for conditional execution or loops are usually treated as statements in other programming languages, but in Ruby they're expressions. An if or a for structure would return the value of the last expression that it evaluated within that structure. That's what happens in Ruby. Ruby has a rich syntax for expressing conditionals. The most basic is this. And it's simply this if statement and then a Boolean condition. The code is executed if and only if this conditional expression evaluates to something other than the Boolean value false or nil. It's important to note that the value 0 is considered a true value in Ruby. So again, if the conditional expression evaluates to anything other than false or nil, the code will be executed. Else clauses can be added, and notice the spelling of the else if. The second E is missing. Ruby provides some shorthand ways of expressing conditionals. Here's one. You have the code, and this code is executed if the condition on the right is true. Ruby also provides a keyword unless. And this is really the opposite of if. The code is executed unless what's on the right-hand side is true. This is really redundant because if you have an if statement, you don't really need this. But sometimes the use of unless can lead to more readable code. Finally, there's a conditional operator that's very similar to the one in C. An expression is executed if it's true, the first chunk of code before the colon is executed, and if it's false, the chunk of code after the colon is executed. Here's a list of the comparison operators that are available to you. There's the test for equality or inequality. We've got less than or equal to, greater than or equal to. And this one's interesting. This allows for a comparison. If what's on the left is less than what's on the right, it returns -1. If they're equal, it returns 0. And if what's on the right is greater, then a +1 is returned. You've already seen this one that allows you to test whether or not a string satisfies a regular expression. And here's one that also works on regular expressions to see if the string does not match the regular expression. Let's talk about iteration. The for in loop iterates over an enumerable collection. So for each item in the collection, the code is executed. We'll talk more about enumerable collections shortly. There's also a while loop. The code is executed while the condition is true. And there's the opposite of that, an until loop. The code is executed until the condition checks true. Again, this is redundant. If you have a while loop, you don't need the until loop. It's provided to help you produce more readable code. Collection classes can be used to store collections of data. The most important collection classes that we'll use in Ruby are the array and the hash classes. Collection classes include the enumerable model as a mix-in. A mix-in is a way to combine classes together, so the methods in the enumerable module become methods in the array and hash classes. Thus, array and hash, and indeed any collection that mixes in enumerable, will share a common set of methods that are provided by the enumerable module. Some of the most important methods in the enumerable module are the iterator methods. Iterator methods are used to iterate, that is, to go through one by one and operate on each element in a collection. Arrays are used extensively in Rails controllers. Recall that this was one of the methods provided in the Rails controller class we created in our Hello World Wide Web app. Remember, the @ symbol means pioneers as an instance variable, and the pioneer.all statement returns an array of the pioneers that were pulled from the database. Arrays hold collections of objects that can be indexed. Here's an example. I'm creating an array called A, and I'm storing 3 different things in it, 33.3, a string high, and the integer 2. So notice that Ruby can create heterogeneous arrays, that is, arrays that can store objects of different types within the same array. To index, we use the bracket notation. So this gives us the item in the first location. There are numerous methods available for the array class. Let's take a look at a few of them. Just like strings, you can index, arrange. Here's how you append a value to the end of an array. You can have a negative index. Positive numbers index from the start of the array, while negative numbers start from the end of the array. So the index -1 returns the last item in the array. The include question mark method tells you if the argument provided is a member of the array. Notice that this question mark at the end of the method name, recall that this is meant to give you a clue that this method returns a Boolean value. Other array methods allow you to sort the array, reverse its order, push and pop items onto the array. Look up arrays in a Ruby language reference if you'd like to learn more. We'll use hashes quite a bit in Rails. A hash is an associative array. In other words, it is a key-value pair where the key and value may be any objects that are separated by this equal greater than symbol. You can index into a hash using the keys. Let's look at an example. Here I'm creating a hash called phone, and you use curly braces to create the hash. For the key I'm using symbols, and for the values I'm using integers. In Ruby it's very common to use symbols to represent the keys, as I've done here. Let's take a look at how we can work with this hash. This is how you index the hash. The value associated with the key home is returned. In other words, 1 is returned. This returns the key associated with the value 1. This is a query to see if the key home exists in the hash. If it does, then it's true, and so a true value is returned in this case. This is a query to see if the value 1 exists in the hash. It does, so a true value is returned. Let's talk about code blocks. In Ruby, a code block consists of multiple lines of code enclosed in either curly braces or between the do and end statements. Most programming languages give you a way to designate code blocks. What's different in Ruby and many other modern programming languages is that you can pass a block as a parameter to a method. In some programming languages, these are referred to as closures. Now, it's important to note a block can only appear in Ruby if it is adjacent to a method call and on the same line as the method call's last parameter. This is what the syntax looks like. You have the method name, the parameters, and then in curly braces, the block of code that you're passing into the method. Now, to invoke that block of code, you use the keyword yield within the method. Here's an example. I'm defining a method called 3 times, and it's just going to execute any block of code I pass into it 3 times because there are 3 yield statements in a row. Let's try it out. In IRB, first define this method and then invoke it, passing in the code block. So this code block is being passed in to this method. And when you do this, you'll see that it just executes that block of code 3 times. Let's talk about iterators and how they use code blocks. In Ruby, the loop structures I showed you before aren't used that often. It's more common to use iterators in their place. Now, the defining feature of an iterator is that it can invoke a block of code, applying it to each element that it's iterating over. A collection class that includes enumerable is required to supply in each method. This method must yield the successive members of the collection, and this is what you're going to iterate over. Iterators work because you can pass a parameter into blocks as well. Here's roughly how it works. The each method in enumerable works like this. For each item in the collection, you're going to yield this item as passed as a parameter to the yield statement. Now, I'm highlighting here that this is pseudocode. This is roughly what it looks like. Let's go back to that array I created previously. I can invoke an iterator on this array in this way. The iterator in this case is each. It's the function I showed you above. And here is the block of code that I'm passing into that function. And what's enclosed between the vertical pipes here is a parameter within my block. And that parameter is being used right here. So this is just going to print the elements of this array. And sure enough, it does that. Here's an iterator used in a Rails view. You can find this in your Hello World Wide Web app under App, Views, Pioneers, and then open the file index.html.erb. This is how a dynamic web page is created in Rails. We've already seen that @Pioneers is an array. Recall that it was created in the controller as an instance variable. Because of this, it's also available in this view. Now let's see how it's used. We're invoking the iterator on it, And in this case, it's between a do and end statements. And remember in Rails, if you enclose something in these angle brackets with a %sign, it gets executed as Ruby code. If you add this equal sign, then it actually gets printed at that place in this code. So what's happening here is we're creating a table. And we're iterating through the pioneers, and we're creating one row for each pioneer. And here's the table data. It's the pioneer's first name, last name, and beside that, we're printing out show, edit, and destroy links. Pioneer enclosed in the vertical bars is the parameter that will be used for each iteration of this iterator. So we'll print out the first name of each pioneer, second name, and so forth.